Welcome, everyone, to another episode of On the House. I'm really excited for this episode. Today, we are going to be joined by John Rickgarn. He is the very first Spartan Invest client that we're having on this podcast, and we're really pumped to hear his story. Thank you so much, John, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Lindsay. You've been on my podcast twice, so I guess I'm on Spartan's podcast now.
And the very first client that we've had on board. And John's
Cool.
been, no pressure. John has been a client with us. You bought your first properties back in 2019. And so first, before we dive in, tell us about yourself, how you got into real estate and what you do for a living, etc.
Sure. Well, about myself, just live in Marshall, Minnesota. For those not familiar with the area, no, that's not by Minneapolis. That's about 3 hours away. So it's about 60 miles from Iowa, 60 miles from South Dakota. As of right now, I am actually a professor at Southwest Minnesota State University in Marshall. I've been married for 16 years. We have a miracle child, Ronald, who just turned 3 and very temperamental about a month ago. So that's a little about me. I guess as far as how I got into real estate, before I was a professor, I spent about 12 years in B2B or business to business sales for an office equipment company and working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. It wasn't uncommon to drive 150, 200 miles a day. And I just had an aha moment, actually almost 10 years ago. I was like, I'm 31 years old. If I work this same schedule for relive my whole life for the next 31 years, I'm still not the arbitrary quote unquote retirement age. So is there a better way than just working your whole life, having one source of income and a paycheck? And then that's where I went down several rabbit holes of, passive income. Obviously, real estate was definitely one of them.
So what was your first step? So that was kind of your aha moment of like, hey, I've got to build other streams of passive income. What was your first step into real estate? Your first purchase, and how did you get there?
So the very first purchase I made was a fourplex in Marshall. Most people start with a single family home. I jumped right into a fourplex.
You dive right in. I love it.
Yeah. So got that. We did have a property management company for it, and obviously learned a lot. Kind of got my feet wet with that scenario. But then it was just, really eye-opening. You can learn a lot from reading books or listening to podcasts like this. At the end of the day, you're always going to learn more stuff actually doing the investment. And you're always going to learn something that none of the gurus or none of the books or none of the bigger pockets posts tell you about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Experience is king there. So after your fourplex in Minnesota, now, did you live in the fourplex as well and then rent it out, or you just had it managed with a third party?
Yeah, just managed it out. No, at that time I didn't know the whole. My wife and I already had bought a house before then. At that point, I didn't know the FHA loophole. Buy a fourplex, 3.5% down, live in one unit, rent out the other 3, pay off your mortgage. Then, although I'm not 100% sure she will let me do that anyways. But regardless, I wasn't aware of that little loophole. But no, that was my start into the real estate game about 8 years ago. Kind of interesting full circle with that. About a year ago, I just kind of thinking, had a couple issues with the property management company. Insurance premiums for fourplexes and larger were really going up, plus property taxes. I was kind of like, I don't know if I want to put it on the market, but if I could get X number of dollars for it, I'd probably be happy. And then just through some network, found another investor, didn't bat an eye, gave us full list or full ask price. I'm like, okay, I guess we'll sell it. So
I love those stories. And so did you gain a good bit of appreciation with that fourplex as well?
A fair amount, yeah. I didn't work for 1031 exchange, just a lot of interesting pieces with that one, but did put some of the money into other investments and savings. And right now, kind of trying to lick my wounds from the last real estate purchase I made, which was not Spartan. I just want to be very, very clear on that. So
I appreciate that. So your first one was kind of in your backyard. So what got you looking into other markets, and how did you determine that? Because most of our investors, like you, are not residents of the state of Alabama or any other state in the Southeast. They are from all over the country and the world. So how did you, I guess, come to find the turnkey model, et cetera, et cetera? Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I don't remember exactly how I came about it. Kind of back to my previous life when I was on the road a lot, I would just listen to old music, on repeat. And then I found these interesting things called podcasts, which I'd never listened to before. But then it's like, okay, if I'm going to be spending an hour to 3 hours a day driving, might as well make the best use of that time. I do remember, though, it was MC Lauscher's Cash Flow Ninja podcast that he had an interview with Maureen McCann that I first heard about Alabama. And if I had to take a guess, 2017, early 2018, if I had to take fathom a guess. So then actually called her up. I still remember talking to her on her cell while she was dropping her kids off, and was learning more about the turnkey, learning more about Spartan and Alabama. Then my wife and I decided, it's like, well, everyone talks a good game. Let's just visit them and see how things are. So it was March of 2019. We actually did a road trip down to Birmingham. Spent a couple days down there, and then fast forward about 6 months, then we purchased our first property with Spartan.
I love it. So of all of currently, how many properties do you own, or how many markets have you invested in?
We've actually scaled back a little bit. So right now we just have the two with Spartan. We actually have a vacation rental VRBO / second home condo in Tucson, Arizona, and then our primary residence. That's the only real estate we have now. But down the line, probably a year or two, I can definitely see expanding even more. So,
what would you say your favorite markets are to target? And I know you've had other real estate deals and purchases in other areas. What would you say has been the most enjoyable to invest in?
Well, honestly, Alabama, just from the price points, property taxes. My wife Heather and I have always liked, if we can invest in a place that we like to visit, and then when we're doing the visits, get a tax write-off. This is not tax or legal advice, but there's other ways to structure the tax code on that. But I myself, really like the Birmingham area, just the attractions, good old pies and pints. I go there every single time when I'm in Birmingham. But then I also like the area where, okay, you don't have to really worry about hurricanes as much, like as if you're in Florida, because I looked at that market. There's still a lot of potential growth. I mean, a lot of people know about Alabama, but it's not like Memphis, Tennessee, for instance. That's been popular for the last 2 decades now. And being here in Minnesota, I had a number of years where snow removal bills really took a bite out of the budget. So if I don't have to budget for snow removal at my rentals, that's even better.
Oh, yes. The only downside is that in Alabama, if we ever do get snow, we do not know how to act.
Sure, yeah.
We'll shut down everything. Yeah, and it's never needed to be removed, but we don't know how to drive. We just don't know what to do in that situation. It's the end of days for us down here in the South. That's for sure. So when you were evaluating Spartan and looking at other markets, what advice would you give those investors that were in your shoes back 2017, 2018? What kind of advice would you give them?
I would say the biggest thing is just be very diligent on research, ask a lot of questions, even hard questions. Even I can kind of share a mini story. When we were doing our road trip, another market I'd heard about was St. Louis, Missouri, and talked to the property management company there. And I still just remember asking her, well, give me an example of something that went wrong or something that went south, and how did you fix it? And she was like, oh, well, I don't think I've ever had any problems with my business. I'm like, okay, a little odd, but whatever.
Property management.
And nothing, no issues she could possibly think about top of her head in property management. It's like, well, that's a first and whatever. And then another question I always ask too is, who's your competition? What other companies, compete with you? And she stops and thinks of it. It's like, oh, well, really, I don't think I have any competition. I'm like, okay, no competition, no problems. I think I want to buy your business. This is like, business utopia right here. Right. So just, those are the two things that stick in my mind. But there were some other conversations and just driving around the neighborhoods. I'm like, yeah, I think I'm not saying St. Louis is a bad market, but it's like, I don't think it's, the fit for us. And then I still, remember when we were coming down to Spartan asking, you, Maureen, Danny, a couple of others, some various questions. And some I think they were a little surprised by, but then even some like, I still remember Maureen saying, yeah, we took some of your advice for keeping properties up with Rudex that she never heard about before. So I kind of liked it where, as a property management company, no one knows everything. Everyone should be, or everyone's constantly learning. So if it's a process of continuous improvement, you make a mistake, you own up to it and move on, then that gets a lot of respect from a business in my book.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that if it's perfection, then it's unreal. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
realistic expectation, and especially in property management, there are always going to be
Yeah.
issues, situations,
Yeah.
lawsuits. There's just an array of different things that can come up. So it really is a testament to how mistakes or problems are addressed, not necessarily avoided,
Mm-hmm.
because they
Yeah.
are inevitable. 100%.
Yeah.
I love the asking the hard questions. And if you listen to this podcast at all, any of our listeners, you know that we talk a lot about asking those questions, especially when, even if you purchase the property, even if it's not with Spartan or Atlas, if you are looking at a property and you are trying to find a property management company, ask the difficult questions, right? Ask them what their metrics are. What is your occupancy? What's your maintenance ratio? What's your turn time? How long does it take for you to get a tenant out of a property and get it back rent ready? Ask all of those questions, because if they don't know, then it's not tracking. They're not tracking it. And if they're not tracking it, then how do you predict how your portfolio is going to perform? So please, I
Exactly.
love asking the difficult questions. So outside of kind of what your problems are, what would you give? I love this view from an investor. What are some other difficult questions that you could advise investors to ask when they're talking to other companies?
Well, the one thing I've learned in kind of the hard way, just kind of more general, like, how landlord friendly versus how tenant friendly is the market. Because I think, you could have the best property, the best tenants, even the best property management company. But if it's in a, not to point fingers, but, Los Angeles, California,
Oh,
or,
yeah.
New York, where they're very, very tenant friendly, then I think that's kind of setting yourself up for at least some hardships down the line. One question that I've started asking now too is, what happens for utility bills that if the tenant doesn't pay it, um, what happens then? Does it follow the owner or does it follow the tenant? And now, thankfully, I haven't had to experience this firsthand, but as I understand with Alabama, it follows the tenant, it follows them in their name versus the owner of the property, which I learned the hard way in another market that isn't always the case. So, always just kind of looking at the auxiliary costs, mortgage, taxes, insurance. Most people can kind of figure that out, but start to ask, like, what are common maintenance issues? How much does it cost to mow the lawn? And I would even say, if it is an instance where the property management is doing some of those upkeeps, ask, how much does it cost? Do you get bids? Do you bid out? How does that work? Because even those little nickel and dime things can really start to affect your cash flow after a while.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Those are all really, really great questions. So do you prefer, purchasing your own or going with a provider? What would you rather?
Uh, yeah, after my last experience, 100% turnkey. Just takes in my opinion, it takes a lot of risk off the plate. Even if there's, I would say in totality, like a little bit less returns, because I know there's some do-it-yourself investors that like, well, I'm going to do all the upkeep, I'm going to do all the rehab, I'm going to do all this to save some money so I can get better returns. It's like, well, yes, but then you're not taking your time into account. And obviously, you're in Alabama, I'm in Minnesota. Even if I was a handyman, which I'm not going to hop on a plane, go down to Alabama, rehab a property, or even have the first idea of who to first contact to do that stuff. So, and kind of with that, I'll just tie another, you know, brownie point for Spartan. Probably the biggest thing that really stood out for me. I still remember getting this call from Marine. Had actually just gotten done with a meeting with our accountant, and we had looked and I think signed for a property in Birmingham. And Marine called me and she's like, "Yeah, I don't think you should go with that one." okay, well, that's odd. Why do you think that? And long story short, there was like some foundation issue. And she's like, this would be a big issue. I'm advising you to walk away. We'll return your earnest money. We'll keep looking. So that really kind of stood out for me that they weren't trying to push, a subpar property. But then later on, I remember talking to Jason when I was down for the Spartan Summit. He said, yeah, it ended up getting so bad, we just demoed the house and sold the lot at a loss. And I don't think there's a lot of businesses that would do that. In fact, I know I'm not going to name names, but there are companies out there that would try to shove very subpar properties on unknowing or, shall we say, not as sophisticated investors.
I mean, I appreciate that. Yes, that's something that we do try to take very seriously, and because it's what's best for the investor, but also it's like we're also maintaining the management of the property, right? So if we put an investor in a subpar property or a property that has issues, and of course we have you know over 2,000 in management, so there are some of our properties that have had problems, right? But if we do that, then we're still on the hook for it. The property stays with us. You were a client of Spartans in 2019, and you are still currently a client of our entities, of our property management company. So the incentives are aligned there, is that, hey, if we set you up to fail, we fail too. So
Right.
that's kind of our principle when we're evaluating whether or not to move forward with a particular property. Well, you had mentioned a couple of times about an experience that you had. Do you mind sharing it? I don't want you to roll anyone under the bus. This is not, I don't want that at
Yes.
all, but I do very firmly believe in full transparency when you are evaluating deals, especially if they're outside of state, and
Yeah.
risk or anything. Any of your experience could help other investors when they are looking to make a decision as to whether or not real estate is for them or not.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, I could probably talk for about an hour with the whole story, but I'll give the most condensed version as I can.
Yeah, don't name any
About
names or anything. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it won't name names, but in 2021, I purchased an off-market duplex in Davenport, Iowa, and initially it was fully tenanted and came with a property management company. In hindsight, I'll admit I didn't do as good of a due diligence as I did in the past, but I was kind of looking at it's like, this isn't my first property. This is, uh, after I bought quite a few, so I can afford to take a little bit more risk. Well, then, so this was October of 2021, bought the property. Within 3 months, the property was 100% vacant, and I had to switch property management companies because they just completely dropped the ball on so many things. So then for property management company number two, I wired them $5,500 for the turns of the unit, some repairs, and some bills. The day after that, they filed for bankruptcy because their trust funds had been compromised. So then I had to find a third property management company and rewire $5,500 to start that process. There was some frozen pipes because the heat was turned off, and there was a lot of finger pointing of who did that. That was another $3,000 worth of damage. Finally, in November of 2022, over a year after I purchased it, we get one unit filled. May 2023, we finally had it fully tenanted, but we had negative cash flow that whole time. 2023, if you just want to Google 2023 Davenport apartment complex, you'll see an entire Wikipedia page as to what happened in a building in Davenport. So then the city got really tight with inspections. So 2024, we had to pay $4,500 of repairs to keep our rental license, all up into scraping and repainting the windows, which I'm not sure how exactly that would cause, the property to be in disrepair or a big issue for tenants, but whatever. And then the final two icings on the cake, we finally exited that property August of this year. We bought it for $130,000, sold it for $99,000, and that $5,500 that I put in for the bankruptcy filings, I got about $305 back. So
Wow, John, I am so
that's about the
sorry.
most condensed version of all the highlights for that 3-year escapade.
Man, I'm so sorry about that. I hate that you went through that, and but unfortunately, right? We don't want to paint this rainbows and roses all of the time with real estate, because those things
Yeah.
can happen, and it does require a lot of due diligence and a lot of legwork to try to check all of the boxes. Everyone who is listening to this podcast, I'm sure, is well aware of the benefits of real estate, and now it's one of the best vehicles for, you know, financial wealth or financial freedom, and so I think we all know that, but it doesn't come easy. There are
Right.
those risks, and I'm so sorry about that. I hate that.
Yeah. Well, like I said, licking my wounds, we'll recover and, head other properties to kind of subdue it a bit. But, that off the top of my head, I know it was at least $50,000 we're out. I haven't sat down and totaled it up, and I just know that's going to tick me off if I do.
Yeah, for sure. If you actually sit there and put like pen to paper on absolutely everything, including like your time and lost income,
Yeah.
that
I just
would.
send everything to my accountant and say, on the silver lining, let me know how much of a loss we have to offset some of our gains.
So even after that though, you said in the future you still foresee you're growing your portfolio. And why do you think that is?
Yeah, just and this is kind of more with the Spartan and even the Alabama markets, and all the markets I've invested in, just in totality, it's had the best returns. Like I mentioned before, the lowest property taxes, insurance premiums are, definitely affordable. Have not had any issue with the tenants. In fact, our one property that we've had, our very first property we bought, Spartan, still has the same tenant in it when we acquired the property. So I think it kind of shows obviously, if they didn't like the area, being the tenants, and they didn't like the property management company, they wouldn't be staying for 5+ years with that. So initially, I kind of wanted to more diversify. I had a grandiose idea of being in 10 markets nationwide at one point. Don't ask me where that number came from. It was just kind of a number out there, but it's like, let's just double down on the area we've had the most luck on. And then we just have one property management company to worry about, one, geographic area to worry about, and, kind of alleviate some of those headaches.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, it's a lot easier to take that path. Hey, you've had success there, so let's focus there. And we do try to talk about diversifying, but honestly, it's more on your very submarkets, and that we'll have investors want to buy several properties in one neighborhood. And
Right.
so we would advise against that. But I'm right there with you. All of my rental properties are in Alabama. They're in various markets,
Mhm.
right? We own property in Tuscaloosa, Birmingham, Montgomery, Huntsville, but they
Yeah.
all, so they're all in Alabama as well. But our I mean, I'm talking about mine and my husband's personal portfolio. And
Sure.
even somebody like you've had a real estate podcast, you've been doing this for years, you still have horror stories. Me personally, I have horror stories on the third property that my husband and I, or I guess the first property that we actually purchased as an investment property, right? Because we moved and kept our old house and rented it out. And then we
Mhm.
had my husband's grandmother's house. And so we rented that one out. So none of those were real like investment properties. But our first one
Right.
that we bought that was ours, I think we're buying this as a rental. We get it renovated, it's ready to go. And the first tenant that moves in never pays a dime. Like they paid the
Oh,
security
jeez.
deposit and first month's rent, moved in, and never paid another penny. And for the
Oh,
most, the vast majority of our properties, if they do happen to go into eviction, they're usually gone before the sheriffs have to come set them out, et cetera, et
mhm.
cetera. Nope, not this one. They stayed the entire time. They stayed,
Oh,
and were fighting the eviction, and kind of knew how to play the system, and so they were in
oh,
there for about 6 months with no payments whatsoever.
oh, jeez.
I know, and we were like, "Oh my goodness!" But then it happens because they were removed from the property, and
Yeah.
the next tenants that we had move in, they have been in there. That happened in so my son was 2, so it happened about 8 years ago, and we've had the same tenants ever since.
Wow.
Yeah, that was so again, it's kind of one of those you have to measure the risk and reward, and is it for you, or is this something that you're capable of dealing with? And if you're very risk adverse, I don't know that real estate would necessarily be for you, because it's hard to
Yeah.
experience what you experienced and still see the benefits of real estate, but they're there. They are 100% there.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't remember. I'm drawing a blank who brought up the quote, if it was Dale Carnegie or what, but 90% of all millionaires came through about with real estate. So it's like, well, might as well just follow where the statistics are showing, a good
Absolutely.
idea of success, basically. So,
Absolutely. John, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us and sharing your story and talking to our audience from a Spartan Invest client standpoint. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Lindsay. This was fun.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. And that's On the House with Spartan Invest.